if you got that close, of course, it'd be taken off the air because you have to provide some kind of balance. And one's attacking attitudes, which I think is the most important thing, because they come from people, not from governments.
Do you want to come in here?
Yes. Do you not think that satire, political satire, is not quite a poor way of putting across your point? Because people have been conditioned through the old Benny Hill type comedies to not associate comedy with ideas and throw away the ideas and enjoy the comedy.
Well, have you been conditioned in that way, do you feel?
No, I don't think I have. I think
no,
a lot of people have.
I think this is always the problem with people on television, when they're censoring anything, is that they put forward what they think other people's weaknesses and vulnerabilities are. You don't believe yourself to be vulnerable or so insensitive as to be conditioned by others, so don't, for goodness sake, believe that there is this mass of pulpy, soft viewers who are going to be influenced badly. It's the same with the violence thing. People say, oh gosh, you shouldn't have that program out because people go out and copy it. And just say to them, well, will you go out and copy it? They go, no, I wouldn't, but there are lots of people who would. So name them. Give me names and addresses of people who are so stupid when they watch television that they have to go out and imitate. After all, I did a sketch with Hugh in which I kept giving him £5 notes and said to Hugh, now you'll note if people in the street stop and give you £5 notes. I mean, if people are going to imitate violence, why don't they imitate generosity? There's plenty of acts of generosity on television. Nobody says, thank God for television making people more generous.
Yes, in the second row.
Do you think in that case that television shouldn't be censored in any way, that you can have anything on television at all, anything that reflects life?
Horribly good question. I think self-censorship is immensely important. I think there should be trust in people who make television. I think if that trust is consistently betrayed, then they will obviously be fired because they're not providing the kind of programs that satisfy people. But I think the difficulty is that television must be allowed to be autonomous. A painter can paint, and why can't a television make programs? Yes.
But in saying you must provide the kind of programme that satisfies people, is there then not a danger that you betray yourself, your own originality, in an attempt to pander to the nation for viewing figures or for whatever else?
Yes, there's a horrible danger of that. And I think you and I, in our series, have been very lucky in doing programmes for BBC Two, and we were able to say to BBC we wanted to do no publicity for the programme at all. We did no interviews based on the programme. We did no previews for the press on it, in order to make sure that it was a sort of ground-up response, that it was people who watched it who made it. There's something terribly insulting about newspaper journalists sort of saying, watch out for this new great series. So by the time you do get to see it, you've already been told to watch it. I can remember in the 70s watching Python when no one wrote about it in newspapers at all, and it was a few friends who said, have you seen that thing that's on Thursdays? It's weird. And the next week say, yes, I saw it. And slowly, and there's a feeling as people watching television that we created the programme because we were the ones who found it, rather than being told to watch it by the presentation.
A question from Robert Hancock.
Alternative comedy really took off after Margaret Thatcher's rise to power. Seeing as your comedy draws so much from Tory ideas, what do you think alternative comedy would exist if, say, a Labour government had been elected instead of Margaret Thatcher?
I don't know. It's an interesting point. I think alternative comedy really means alternative audiences rather than alternative performers. I've always felt that basically, after all, everyone who is a performer like myself, all the sort of Harry Enfield, Ben Elton, Rick Mell and so on, if they hadn't gone into comedy, they would have been part of an audience. And they're part of a generation of people who wanted to see something else, and those who actually were comedians obviously did something else. Under a Labour government, I don't think there would be any difficulty, certainly not for me, because, as I say, I've never really attacked the government, and one's attacking attitudes. Yes?
Nonetheless, your comedy always has been staunchly liberal. Are there any people who are right-wing but funny whom you find amusing?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I have to say that it would be foolish to have a sort of politics of comedy in which you can only find people amusing if you're on the same political side of them. I mean, Bernard Manning, for all the horror of some of his jokes, is, I think, a supremely good and gifted joke teller. It's incredibly hard to deny that the sight of this man with these large slitty eyes just standing in the corner of a room with a microphone, not moving, telling jokes somehow at a pace and in a way that just makes me crack up every time.
In your column in The Listener, of course, now you advised Neil Kinnock on how to deal with Mrs. Thatcher in the Commons. Was that out of a desire to see Mrs. Thatcher defeated in the Commons?
Yes, and also a desire for fair play. I mean, I think Kinnock is a very articulate and intelligent man, but I think he didn't have at least then the sort of PR motivation to give a performance in the Commons that would show him off at his best.
Isn't it something of a condemnation of him if he has to be advised on how to be witty, on how to be dynamic in his speech making?
It depends what you look for in your politicians. If you want a politician who is simply extremely witty and clever and good at making remarks in the House of Commons, then I suppose it is. But if you want a politician who actually has a grasp of the needs of the country and the way to be a politician, which is not to be a comedian, then I don't think it's condemnation at all.
And do you think he has?
Personally, I do. I think he has them in abundance, yes. But then it may be that all one's looking for in a politician now is a sort of PR suit.
Yes, do you want to come in?
Did you ever think of going into politics yourself? Because quite frankly, anybody that can crush Margaret Thatcher will get my vote anyway.
To be honest with you, and it sounds very, I have sort of thought about it, but then, you know, with the shady past of the kind I've got, I keep feeling that the moment I tried to stand for a seat, there would be incredibly sordid revelations from, you know, people I sort of sat next to at school and things like that, and sort of nightclubs I'd been to and things like that. And you know, once you're in showbiz, unless you've got the press on your side, they can. And people are occasionally stupid enough to think that just because somebody has occasionally drunk a bottle of wine and fallen over drunk in a pub, that means he can't be a prime minister.
Yes.
Instead of perhaps actually then entering Parliament, would you perhaps be interested in advising MPs on how to conduct themselves in Parliament, give them advice on making speeches and whatever?
Well, it's a dodgy one. I mean, because I think one of the difficulties in this country has been that there have been so many, a sort of whole underground of people running around politics who are not voted for, but who have extreme power. I mean, look at Tim Bell, who advises Margaret Thatcher on her haircuts and her how to pronounce her vowels and so on. I mean, I think there is something faintly unpleasant about people like that and getting distributed with their knighthoods for services to the party and so on. I think politics should be honest in this country, that basically you have MPs. I find it extraordinary that Lord Young of Grantham, who has such incredible power in this country, has never been voted for. He was just an industrialist who was shoved into the House of Lords. And I think that is extraordinary in democracy, and creaky and cranky as our democracy is, I think it ought to, at least to be based on votes.
Yes, do you want to come in?
Do you think that Parliament's not honest? Do you think that is because of our so-called democracy? Do you think our parliamentary system should be changed then to make politics more honest?
I think there is an interesting point there, what one might call a constitutional one, and that is that it's a very delicate constitution we have, as you all know, and one of the problems is it's very easy for a government to think that it is the nation. And the difficulty, I think, a lot of times with this government is that we have a government voted in on roughly 43%, which then says, because we are voted in by the majority, whatever that may be, everything we say and think must be a majority view, and therefore everything that's a minority view must be sort of really basically democratically not allowable. Therefore, if 43% of the people think that, for instance, telephones should be privatized, then anybody who argues against telephones being privatized is being anti-democratic, because the 40% say they should be and only 30% don't. And I think you know, a lot of a forum for debate is excluded all the time by that. That basically, Margaret Thatcher's point of view is you're either with us or you're against us, and I think that must be a lie.
Well, let's move on a while. A question from Damien Kelly.
Again. David?
Damien Kelly.
Damien Kelly.
Yes, I think that comic relief, for all the good it does, is got a danger of it removing the government's responsibility for its actions.
I think that there's no question about that at all. You know, charity tends to be inimical to people on the left, because essentially you're going back to a Victorian age in which hospitals are built by sort of figures with thumbs in their waistcoats whose statues are outside the hospital. You know, the Josiah, you know, Blenkinsop ward, you know, and the rich man has bestowed his largesse on the poor workers and said, there, I built you an hospital, be grateful, you know. And you know, not to decry the northern philanthrope.
At the same time, there was a certain amount of that sort of philanthropy within Comic Relief itself, considering you got Woolworths, Burton and BP to sponsor some of the major events. They could well afford it, but they also desperately needed the publicity like any large company. How can you justify and reconcile the two issues there? It's
a very difficult one. I mean, the phrase that's often used is it's a sticking plaster operation. And my view is basically, if you're walking down the street and the man is bleeding, then a sticking plaster is a very useful thing. If people are starving, you don't go immediately to Hyde Park Corner and stand on a soapbox and make a speech about it. You grab around in your pockets for some money to give them something to eat. And it may be that you then go off to Hyde Park Corner and make a speech and try and change people's attitudes. But while there is real suffering, it's terrible.